Okay, good evening, everybody. So today's session, we are going to go over sort of the national support session, looking at assignment one, sort of post grading, where you sort of went wrong, so very generalized feedback. Assignment two, PACER, and then we're going to go over our learning unit 6. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with my national support session. Okay, so firstly, just some reminders. Take note of the due date of the assignment. Remember that if you submit within 24 hours after due date, you get a minus 15% deduction. If it's more than 24 hours, you get 0. So please take that into account and please be prepared for it. You need to submit via ARC and not via email. You need to consistently be working towards your assignment. Try not to procrastinate and leave everything for last minute, because that's where things go wrong. Read and listen to the slides and the recordings for tips, especially a recording like this one. It does help. If you are submitting, or when you are submitting and there is a problem with your submission, make sure you take a screenshot and you send it to your student VC Assist, and always inform me. If you're having technical issues for whatever the case may be, just make sure that you inform me and you are letting the VC Assist know. Referencing. Very, very important. You guys need to study the IIE Harvard Referencing Guide. A lot of you didn't tick the boxes when it came to referencing, and then you ended up with a minus 5% for minor error, and major errors became minus 10%. So make sure you are ticking those boxes. In-text referencing is very important, so make sure you are doing that. Any sort of additional information away from the module outline is very important. So you'll see in your assignment 2 specifically, there is a lot that's outside of your textbook. They're asking you to use AI. So please make sure that you're following those instructions and you're doing it correctly. And when I say you're doing it correctly, you are actually physically referencing it correctly. Submit your assignment in PDF, and please do not put any photo conversion. There is illustrations that's due for assignment 2. Make sure you're copying and pasting it into your Word document that you're then converting into a PDF. Don't send me any photo conversions. Okay. Key areas for improvement. So 3 main areas. Number 1 is make sure that you apply your case study. So read, understand your theory, apply your case study, because that's where your marking or your marking guideline will come into play. Okay, so for instance, if you have a question worth 15 marks and they ask you to list and explain 3 elements of capacity planning, it's now basically going to be for 5 marks each, 2 marks theory, 3 marks application. So that's basically how it would function. All right. Number 2, structure. Structure, very important. Make sure you're using the assignment template. When you are doing your essays, make sure that you have an introduction, a body, as well as a conclusion, and you have good sentence construction. Any sort of external research using other sources that is outside of the textbook, I would recommend. In your assignment 2, you'll see that you're asking for a lot of those. Okay. Then it comes to your preparation. Read your learning units and contextualize the information to the case study. Make sure that I sort of kind of did this for you in the PACER to help you understand where that content is basically sitting. Keyword sometimes is highlighted or in bold, so make sure you are looking out for that. Pace yourself, as I mentioned, don't procrastinate, understand how much time you need for each question, and then run with it from that perspective. Your rubrics are very important. There is a lot of rubrics in your assignment too, so make sure that you are following your rubrics very carefully. Unpack your different questions. If they're asking you to identify or discuss or explain, make sure you're providing sufficient content around how many marks the question is. Also, make sure you're using an assignment template and you are looking at the rubric. So you'll see that I've literally probably about 3 times or 4 times repeated myself when it came to marking guideline and rubric. It is very, very important that you familiarize yourself with this. Do not go and write 2 points for a 10-mark question. You are probably getting 2 marks if it makes sense. So make sure that you are writing sufficiently and you're not rewriting the same thing, just in a different way, because I will not mark it. Okay. So that is your national support session. So I'm going to quickly run over your assignment to PACER. I will share this when we're done here. So you'll see that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 questions in total. It goes from theme 1 all the way down to it goes from learning unit 1 all the way down to learning unit 7. So today we're going to conclude learning unit 6. So next week we'll have concluded learning unit 7. Then you'll obviously be ready. I think learning unit 7 is capacity planning, I think, which is the last question in your assignment. Make sure you understand this assignment very well. The assignment uses or asks you to use a lot of AI. Make sure that you are just referencing this correctly when you are using AI. Okay. So I leave the PACER in your hand for you to look after or for you to take note of. I'm not going to go over each one individually, but this is basically what the PACER looks like. I went over each question, found where the information is basically sitting and put it together in a PACER. So it makes it a lot easier when you are looking for the specific information. Okay. Is there any questions so far? Okay. Then let's run through our learning unit. Just give me 1 second quickly. Okay, so we're going to run over our learning unit 6, theme 1 and 2. Next week's session will be on learning unit 7. And then we will sort of like conclude what we need to go through in terms of your assignment 2. If you have any questions relating to your assignment 2, you know where to find me, either email or WhatsApp. I'm best on WhatsApp. So please just message me and then I'll try and help you the best way I possibly can. Okay, so then we look at material requirements planning. And this is one of the featured questions in your assignment 2. So please go through it, understand it, know what is required from it. So when we talk about MRP, so Material Requirements Planning System, it's basically planning, scheduling, an inventory management system. So when you have to manage a manufacturing process, for instance, you need the materials and the products that are available for production and delivery, whilst you minimize your inventory level and your production costs. Okay, so you want to be able to plan yourself out when you are going into a production or a manufacturing process. So some of the key functions of MRP system, so your material requirements planning system, number 1 is inventory control. Basically, you need to know that you have the right materials that is available at the right time for when you are starting to go into a production process. You want to avoid as much shortages as possible and also avoid too much of stock. So you want to have control over your inventory, so making sure you have the right materials available at the right time. So that's where inventory control comes into play. Production planning, we need to be able to plan the production schedule by making sure we understand what products needs to be manufactured and when, based on what the customer orders or based on any sort of demand forecast. So for instance, if we are a retail company and we're producing caps, shirts and pants, if our demand forecast is sitting more in the cap side, then our production process or our production planning process needs to speak more towards production of caps first at X amount, then we move on to the other relevant items. Okay, so we need to make sure that we are planning it correctly. Scheduling. So your MRP specifically calculates when materials and components are required for production. So orders can be placed so that they are available when you basically need it. So you want to schedule anything from a raw material or a semi-finished good that is required in your production process to come into your manufacturing or your production when it's basically needed. And it's available basically when you need it. Then we have what we call bill of material, and you'll see this a lot throughout this specific chapter. So we call it BOM, so bill of material. So basically this is a detailed breakdown of the product structure. So this is the bill of material. It's a detailed breakdown of the product structure. It basically lists all of the materials and the components needed to make a product. So for instance, if we are manufacturing a cap, then we need probably, hardboard, we need material, we need cotton, we need emblems, whatever that case may be, everything that is involved in the bill of material, involved in producing that specific item needs to be in your bill of material. Okay, and then the last one is your lead time management. So your MRP basically helps you to manage your lead time for ordering material. So basically when they arrive basically when it's needed without causing any delays in production. So basically what your MRP improves is efficiency. You want to reduce as much wastage as possible, and you want to help the business to meet customers' demands. So whereas you are optimizing your inventory, so you don't have too much of inventory or too little inventory, and you also have an optimized production process. So you don't have any stoppages in your production process, and it basically just becomes a free-flowing element. Okay. Then we move on to the basic conditions of MRP. So MRP basically functions effectively as a system that has several sort of conditions, right? Whether it's optimizing inventory, production scheduling, or just a specific procurement process. So one of it is accurate demand planning or demand forecasting. So you need precise demand forecasting to determine what your production needs are going to be. If your demand is unpredictable, meaning you don't know what your demand is going to be, or it fluctuates significantly, the MRP system can definitely struggle to schedule your production efficiently. You need clear visibility into what your customer orders. You need to know what the different seasonal trends are, whether it's Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or Christmas or festive, and different market forecasts is critical for the system to work and the system to work well. So you need to know whether your demand forecasting is done as accurately as possible, and it should not vary significantly. Then you need a well-defined bill of material. So your MRP system relies on basically a very accurate and detailed bill of material, which outlines all your components, all your raw materials, which is needed to manufacture that specific product. The bill of material, it must be complete, it must be absolutely correct, it must be up to date, so that the MRP can basically calculate material requirements. So how much of material is basically required for production of that specific product. If you have an inaccurate bill of material, you can have a lot of production errors, you can have delays, and you can have wastage because you're basically producing the incorrect item. Then we look at stable production plans. So your MRP works best in an environment where your production is as stable as possible. Especially when we're looking at your production schedule, there's very little disruption in your manufacturing process. If there is going to be frequent changes in that, or sudden shifts in your product demand or the design, etc., your MRP is going to struggle to keep up with the changes, which can lead to a lot of inefficiencies in your business. So make sure that you have a stable production plan, just so that you can maneuver your manufacturing process. If there is going to be a lot of frequent changes, then we're going to have a bit of a problem with your MRP system. Accurate inventory data. For MRP specifically to function the best way, you need real-time, or basically almost real-time inventory data. So how does this work? You need something that is pretty automated. You need a system that has a good WMS. Your system needs to have a good, accurate information on current stock levels, what is in progress, and any lead times for orders that, for raw materials. So you want to understand if you do have poor inventory accuracy, it can lead to the system to generate basic, incorrect production or procurement orders. So you need an accurate inventory data, and it's coupled with a warehouse management system, basically. Then we have a reliable supply performance. So your MRP depends on having a timely delivery of raw materials from its suppliers. If your supplier delays or basically fails to deliver according to the timeline, then your MRP is going to be disrupted. So your MRP works best when your suppliers are dependable and your delivery schedules are planned and it goes as planned. Right. Then we have integration with other systems. So MRP is often like the broader ERP, or the enterprise resource planning system. So it functions best when it's integrated with other systems like a financial management system like SAP, for instance, or a sales procurement supply chain management process like an Ariba. The integration basically allows for your MRP to access the data from basically the entire business and ensure that the production planning aligns with the business sort of process. Then you have consistent lead times. So your MRP system assumes that lead times are acquired, especially from a material perspective. It's quite consistent. If your lead times are unpredictable or it fluctuates a lot, it's very difficult to schedule a good MRP. And then the last one is skilled personnel and effective training. You want your MRP system to have skilled personnel who understands it from a system perspective as well as a production process perspective. So you need proper ongoing training for employees to make sure that the MRP system is being used correctly. And if there's any changes, they can adapt really quickly to these changes. So I think in general, your MRP system functions well when it's quite structured, especially from a production environment perspective, with predictable demands, stability when it comes to production processes. You have good inventory data, you have good suppliers, etc. So when all of these conditions are met, you can have as much optimization as possible, and you can improve your efficiency within your business. Okay. Then we want to run over the different sort of objectives of MRP. So the primary objective is basically optimization, especially from a production perspective. You want efficiency, you want to reduce as much cost as possible, and you want to have timely delivery of your product. So by doing this, some of the objectives from an MRP perspective is making sure that you have material availability. So making sure that whether it's a raw material, whether it's a work in progress component, whether it's a different sub-assembly, it's basically available when you need it for production. If there's any, delays, it basically doesn't call for a smooth production flow. So making sure that you don't have any material shortages and your material is available when you basically require it. You want to minimize your inventory level. So you want to reduce as much excess inventory as possible by purchasing your raw material or your work in progress or your different components only when it's required or necessary. So you want to prevent as much overstocking. And what happens with overstocking? It's cash sitting in that stock. You can have storage issues, you can have theft, you can have big risk from an obsolete product. So you want to avoid as much risk as possible. So you want to order your inventory basically when you require it. Okay. Then we have optimizing production schedule. You want to align your how much material you have available with how much is required from a production perspective. So your MRP basically helps you create the schedule so you don't have that much of idle time with your machinery or your workers. So basically, it just improves your overall production efficiency. You want to improve your customer service by making sure that the products are manufactured on time. You basically get it delivered as quickly as possible to your customer. And your MRP basically helps meet your customer's demand. You want to have overall customer satisfaction because that is the main point when it comes to producing a product, is you want your customer to buy it, it's of high quality and your customer is satisfied. And it also enhances the company's reputation. So you want all of those tick boxes going on. Then we have reducing your production cost. So your MRP helps to minimize your waste and inefficiency. You're reducing both from a material cost perspective, so where you are basically only ordering what is required, and then from a production cost perspective, where you are optimizing your schedule or your MRP, where you are reducing as much bottlenecks as possible. And then the last one is improving your workflow, improving your resource utilization. So your MRP will be able to give you a more structured approach to planning and controlling your production processes. So basically, when we talk about labor, machinery, materials, all of these things are being used as optimally as possible so that you have um, uh, an efficient and an optimized schedule or production process. Okay. Then we look at dependent demand. So when we're looking at dependent demand of your MRP, your dependency on demand means that the demand for the item depends on the demand for another item. Like, for instance, when we look at the manufacturing of a car, for instance, and I want to go through sort of like the different inputs when it comes to your MRP system specifically. I do have an example, but I'm going to share this on ARC with you just so that you have more of an understanding. So when we look at the management of demand specifically, once a business or an organization manages not only the orders that they get from their customer, but also the forecasted demand that they've basically forecasted within their business, this is basically known as demand management. So one cannot exist without the other. Therefore, the business needs to have correct processes in place to basically enable it to interface with the market. So whether it means them keeping an order book, every sale is basically entered into the specific order book, they're forecasting their demand, they're promising orders by customers to the sales force, basically. So there's a lot of variations when it comes to management of demand. Then when we look at management of customer orders, so your customer orders are basically those firm, real orders that has been placed with the by the customer with your business. These orders are in basically like an order book that can be changing. It's important to make sure that you comply with these specific orders, because the management of demand forms part of the input into your MRP. Okay, and then the last one is order variation. Basically, it happens when a customer changes their mind about what they've ordered at a very short notice. So imagine you basically ordered a new item of clothing, and before you take delivery, you change your mind and you inform that specific business that you don't want that item of clothing anymore. This is typically what happens in both manufacturing and your service industry. So as more and more businesses compete for, smaller portions of the marketplace, flexibility in this regard is basically speaking about having a competitive edge. So if you're flexible enough to change the customer's order or the different order variation, then you can be seen as being quite competitive in the market. If the business cannot compete on customer satisfaction, basically the chances of survival is very little or very small. Okay. Then we want to look at the inputs of your MRP system. Okay. So the first one is your MRP. Your first one is your input one. So there's three basic inputs. Input one is your MPS. Input two is your bill of materials, so your BOM. And your input three is your accurate inventory records. Okay. So when you have to look at your MPS, basically it's the primary input of an effective MRP system. The MPS is basically one of the most important tools when it comes to planning and control from a manufacturing perspective. So you need to be able to manage the MPS with a operations manager, for instance, so that you have good customer satisfaction at the end of the day. It's also very important that the MPS is not overstated, you're not inflating it. So you want to have a capacity constraint that should be realistic. You don't want to have too little materials or too much materials. So you want something that's basically not broken. You want something that's going to be working at the end of the day, and that's where your demand forecast comes into play. Okay. Your input two is your bill of material structure. And this is your product structure tree. And as I explained, it basically is a list contained with all the different items that's needed to build one item of a finished product. So all of the items that's required in that finished product needs to be contained in this BOM. So the result is that each product produced by a business needs to have its own bill of material. So in an MRP system, the bill of material is basically the first hurdle that the business needs to overcome. So the larger the product becomes, the more parts is basically required to assemble the product. It can be quite large, it can be quite cumbersome. So you need basically quite an accurate bill of material so that your MRP system can basically operate. And then your input three, which is your accurate inventory records. You basically want your inventory records that are stored information, understanding what the status of all your items required at a specific time period. So what is the requirement for each part? What is the scheduled date of receipt of that material? How much stock on hand do you have at the facility or at the store? So you need to understand, who's the supplier, what is the lead time, what is the different sizes or the lots that need to be produced. So everything that comes with having a good inventory system speaks to having a good MRP system. It is impossible to install an MRP system if you don't have a good inventory system. So you can see anything from a material production schedule, a bill of material, as well as an accurate inventory record. If these three inputs are not done correctly, you cannot have an MRP system. So making sure that these three are ticked in terms of boxes, that's when you know your MRP system is working and is functional. Okay. Then we want to look at the different structures of an MRP. So when we look at from an MRP perspective and the structure, you want to make sure that your MPS, your bill of material, your records for inventory, for purchasing, all of this speaks to each other in terms of your input for a good MRP system. Everything is in a time-phased approach, what parts is required, what raw materials is required, etc. And basically how the structure of the MRP goes is you need to first understand what is your gross requirement. So your gross requirement is the total demand that can be expected for either a raw material or a component in a specific time period. So your gross requirements do not take into account any stock on hand of of that item. So you don't look at it from a stock on hand perspective. The requirements for finished and end items are derived from your MPS. And when you look at it from an assembly's perspective, the requirements are derived from your planned order releases of parent items, so where the main product is being produced, and then you basically have the rest of the assembly. Then we have a schedule receipt. So this is basically any open orders that is outstanding. It means that the orders have been placed at suppliers, but it's not yet received. And the quantities will be received at the beginning of a specific product schedule. Projected on hand. So this is an amount that will be available at the beginning of a specific period. So if you are running production periods that is very specific based on the product, you will have different time frames of when different items are going to then be available, and you're going to have scheduled receipts and any inventory left over, etc. Net requirement is the exact amount of items that will be needed in a specific time period. Planned order receipt is the amount of material that is going to be received at the beginning of a time period of when it's basically required. Okay, and then planned order received releases is the amount of an item that the business plans to order in a specific period. Okay, then we have this example of 100 wooden tables. Okay, and I'm going to try and explain this the best possible way, going into the different scenarios. All right, so the company wants to produce 100 wooden tables in the next month. Each table requires several components, and the demand for these components is dependent on the number of tables that is produced. So the first one is your MPS, so your material production schedule. The MPS specifies that the number of finished wooden tables that needs to be produced is 100 tables over the next month. So that's 100 wooden tables. Your bill of material basically shows a breakdown of all the material and the components that's required to build a wooden table. So for one table, basically, you have one tabletop, 4 legs, 5 screws, 1 varnishing can. Okay. Your inventory status check, your inventory records track the available stock of components and raw materials before production begins. The company checks its inventory and finds the following. There is currently 20 units of tabletops in stock. There's 100 units of table legs in stock. There's 200 units of screws in stock. And there's 10 units of varnish cans in stock. Okay. So your MRP logic thereafter is you need to understand, using your MPS and using your bill of material, what the MRP system is now going to calculate in order for you to now produce 100 tables. So, and I'll share this on ARC so you have more of an understanding. So when you require 100 tabletops, you now have 20 tabletops on hand. Your net requirement is 80. So you had 20 on hand, you need 100. Your net requirement for how much you need is now 80. Similarly with legs, you have 4 legs per table, you need 100 tables. That's 100 times 4 is now 400 legs. You have 100 legs on hand, so you now need 300 legs net requirement. Screws, you need 5 screws per table. That's 500 screws for 100 tables. You now have 200 on hand, so your net requirement is 300 screws. And varnishing cans, you need 100. You're currently sitting with 10, so you need 90 in terms of your net requirement. So your MRP system now generates the orders, okay, for in terms of how many tabletops is required, what legs is required, what the screws are, what the varnishing cans are. So these basically orders are scheduled based on the production timeline and the lead times for delivery. Okay, so whether it takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever that time period is, that's what it's going to be. Okay, but I'll share that example so you have a bit of an understanding. Okay, then we look at the different outputs of MRP, and there's 2 different outputs. So when we look at outputs, we want to look at sort of like the information that's available from a management perspective to use in the decision-making process. So a primary report is one where it is your main reports and basically your production planning, your control, your inventory, all of these are primary reports that is required. So these are your main reports that is produced. The outputs of your MRP system provide the schedules, so you need to understand what is changing. So any details on changes to existing orders, what orders is planned, and what orders are going to be released. So those are some of the main reports. Your secondary report is your optional reports. So your optional report is basically from a performance perspective, evaluating the performance of the system. Operations managers can basically use this as any deviation from the plan, any stockouts that occur. So anything that's going to help you internally to make a decision, that's where your secondary report is going to come into play. Okay, then we look at your other aspects of MRP. So once basically an operations manager is quite well versed in their inputs, their outputs, and the different processing of how an MRP system actually functions, he needs to understand a number of other issues regarding the MRP. So number one is safety stock. So as a result of having a good MRP system, no business with dependent demand should hold safety stock below the finished product level. So the reason for this is you need to be able to predict precisely how much of stock is required so that you're not sitting with too much of safety stock. So you need to understand where the different work centers are sitting, determine the full extent of your variability. So basically understanding where your safety stock, so you don't have much bottlenecks in the production, in the manufacturing process, and it doesn't go slow. You want it to go at a good speed. You don't want your resources or your laborers to run out of work. So you don't need any idle workers. So you want to have it running at all times without sitting with too much from a safety stock perspective. And then we have lot sizing. So lot sizing is basically making sure that you select a size of a batch of products to be manufactured to meet the requirements. So if you are in an inventory planning phase, it's quite important to be dependent or independent in terms of your demand. So you need to use different economic order quantities, as your lot size, so you can produce or purchase based on what the demand is. So you need a good plan, and you need to work on what is dependent in terms of your demand. Okay. And then we have our ERP. Okay, so we do know that ERP functions really well when we work in conjunction with an MRP system or a sales process or a procurement system, etc. So when we look at it from an ERP perspective, this is a software system that a lot of businesses use where they integrate and manage key business processes. So they want to, whether it is from a finance perspective or a procurement, HR, inventory, production, sales, supply chain, they can use basically one system from an integration perspective to give them a centralized view of data and processes so that they can have as much efficiency in the decision-making process as possible. So some of the features of ERP is we can integrate with the different business functions, so be it finance, procurement, HR, inventory, production, etc. Everything can be under one platform. It's data sharing basically and collaboration between departments so that you're not sitting with silos anymore. Everyone's basically working together. It is a centralized database. So basically making sure that your data is consistent, it's up to date across all of your departments. So in a sales, system, updates inventory, updates finance, updates production. So that's one of the benefits of using an integrated ERP system. Real-time data processing. So your ERP system basically processes your data in real time. So you'll get an instant update, whether it's from an order perspective, an inventory, or whether it is from a production. So your real-time access improves your decision-making and your agility, etc. Then you have automation of processes. So your ERP automates any sort of like manual work or repetitive work, whether it is payroll processing or order tracking, financial reporting. So anything that is basically using human error, and so that you can have better productivity. That's what it's eliminating. And then the last one is scalability and customization. Because it's pretty modular, you can basically implement only specific functions that you need in order for you to scale up the business. And you can customize it to what you want to see. So it doesn't always have to be, a normal, simple ERP system. Every business has a different ERP system that just works for them. Okay. So an example of sort of an ERP system, consider basically a manufacturing company that uses an ERP system to manage its basic, operations. Your sales team puts in an order for 500 units of a product. Okay, let's say it's caps. The ERP system automatically checks the inventory to see if there's enough raw materials that is available. And if it's not, then it kicks into the production or the procurement process to generate purchase orders to now buy this raw material. So then the production schedules the manufacturing process, while the finance portion of it records the sales order for billing purposes. Your warehouse updates on stock levels once the order is being fulfilled and shipped. And throughout this process, your HR then tracks your employee work hours, their payroll for staff, anyone that's involved in either the production or the logistics of it. Basically, the ERP system integrates different business functions. It streamlines your operations and basically ensures that the entire business is working from one real-time data set. So it's a very powerful tool that helps a lot of businesses to manage their business processes. And it's all like sort of unified. Everything is sitting in one in one space, basically. Okay. then I think we are on our last slide, which is the impact of electronic commerce. Okay, so electronic commerce, for those of you who don't know, it is basically the long version of what we call e-commerce. And it's basically significantly impacted your ERP processes or ERP systems, because a lot of businesses now want something that's streamlined, more process driven, and using real-time data. So e-commerce basically is the buying and selling of goods over the internet, and integration with the different ERP systems has brought a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges for businesses. So when we look at sort of like the key impacts of e-commerce on um, ERP systems, you want to look at the integration of front end and back end. So your e-commerce platform functions on using a front end system where your customer basically goes on, places their order, makes their payment, etc. Your ERP system manages the back end, such as inventory, order fulfillment, accounting, the logistics, etc. So there is a growing need to basically integrate the e-commerce platform with an ERP system so that you have a smoother operation. It allows for real-time data flow, allows businesses to automatically update their inventory level, process their orders, etc. Then we have real-time inventory management. So e-commerce basically operates 24/7. I know I sit at like midnight on, these clothing websites to, order online. It has to have real-time visibility into the inventory so that you are not purchasing an item that is out of stock. There's no back orders, there's no overselling, etc. So your ERP system needs to adapt to providing as accurate information from an inventory perspective as possible. If you're having multiple warehouses or a single warehouse, basically needs to happen. Your automation and ordering process. So e-commerce transactions generate high volumes of orders, especially when we're looking at seasonality trends. So it basically requires a lot of automated processing for efficiency. So your ERP system needs to handle this data influx where basically it automatically creates the sales order, generates your invoice, prints out your waybill, etc. And there's a lot of systems now that speak to the different ERP systems with, EDIs or APIs. So there's a lot more integration that can happen, especially when you are looking at it from a logistics perspective. Okay. Enhance customer experience. So your customers expect the online or the e-com process to go as smooth sailing as possible. So you want real-time tracking, you want good pricing or accurate pricing, and you want all of this to be supported by a good ERP system. The worst or the last thing you want is your customer to purchase an item, and then when you get to the checkout stage, it's almost double in price. So you need to have everything sort of synchronized, which then takes us to data synchronization and analytics. So e-commerce basically generates a lot of data relating to different customers' behaviors, different sales trends, customers' different order histories, etc. So the data must be synchronized with the ERP system so that it is providing valuable business insights. So you know where to focus your sales on, you know where to focus your marketing strategies on, and where your demand planning is coming into play. Multi-channel operations. So e-commerce obviously involves selling through multi-channels, whether it's your own website, whether it is a Takealot or a Facebook Marketplace. There's different versions of multi-channel operations. So your ERP needs to be able to support these different multi-channel operations so that you are centralizing your orders, your inventory is speaking to the same, it's live, and you're using your customers' data from different sales channels. Scalability and flexibility. So as your business grows from an e-com perspective, your ERP must be able to basically scale up to handle any increased order volumes, and then scale down if it doesn't doesn't count for it. So it needs to be very flexible so that you can increase or decrease when you basically need to. Improve supply chain. So e-commerce basically increases the complexity of the supply chain. So businesses basically deal with a lot of different suppliers, manufacturers, distribution partners. So you basically need seamless coordination between all these parties within your ERP system so that you have good supply chain management capabilities as well. Whether it's multiple location, whether it's ordering process, and you want it as automated as possible, you want to reduce delays, you want to minimize as much errors as possible. Payment gateway and financial integration. So e-commerce involves multiple payment gateways. I mean, Peach Pay, PayPal, these are some of the payment gateways that we have, especially from a South Africa perspective. Your transactions needs to accurately be recorded in your ERP system for accounting or tax purposes, or even just your financial management perspective. So it needs to be able to be equipped to handle different currencies. So if you are opening out your website to the international market, it needs to speak to that international criteria as well. And then the last one is customization and personalization. So e-commerce businesses often rely on giving the customer a very personalized customer experience, whether they're giving a customer a customized product, customized pricing. Your ERP system needs to be able to support the different personalized features. And especially from a modern ERP, they're allowing for these customized workflows, any sort of data management. So basically, whatever you need, the new ERPs are now allowing that to happen. And you can scale it up if that's what you want to see. And if you don't want to see it, you don't need to see it. Okay, so that basically is our MRP, our three inputs, which is our MPS, our BOM, as well as our inventory control, and then our ERP system coupled with our ecom and how ERP benefits from that perspective. All right, I think that is it for today. We can close off now. Is there any questions? I assume not. All right, so I will share the slides, the PACER, the NSS, so the National Support Session for this module on ARC, just so that you can have a view of it. Your assignment is due on the 5th of May, if I'm not mistaken. So next week, I will finish off Learning Unit 7, so at least you know that's done, and then you can obviously work on your assignment. Well, I hope you already started working on your assignment. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me, and I can help you wherever I possibly can. Okay, thank you so much. Have a lovely evening and a fabulous Easter weekend.